أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على رسولنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Today we'll continue from the 25th word, which talks about the miraculousness of the Quran, and we'll read some other sections from this very book, Sign of Miraculousness, which explains the first 33 ayah, verses from the second chapter of the Quran and the first chapter. Today's topic will be how can we ensure that Quran is miraculous? So Quran is miraculous in 40 different aspects. One of them, we can mention some of them. One of them is it has prophecies of the future. It has tens of prophecies which were all confirmed over time. It has scientific miracles, which 1500 years ago, Quran has stated some of the facts of the science which were later discovered, maybe hundreds of years later. It talks about the Big Bang Theory. It talks about universe continuously expanding. It talks about how human beings are created inside the womb of the mother, and many other things which were later scientifically were proven. But Quran has stated these 1500 years ago. What other aspect does the Quran have? It has a miraculous aspect where it has brought a Sharia, a law, which is continuing to be valid in the human nature. So the human laws change over time, but the Quran, has never changed and will never be changing. And what else? Today we'll talk about the eloquence of the Quran. So the biggest aspect that Quran is miraculous is thought to be its eloquence. So let's read from here. First aspect, it possesses miraculousness, and its miraculousness exists for the following reasons. The great majority of the people of the Arabian Peninsula at the time were illiterate, so they didn't know how to read or write, many people at the time. Due to this, rather than in writing, they preserved the sources of their pride, historical events, and stories, encouraging good morality by means of poetry and eloquence. So due to them being illiterate, this caused them to improve in eloquence and poetry. Due to the attraction of poetry and eloquence, meaningful sayings would remain in people's memories and be passed down the generations. In consequence of this innate need, therefore, the goods most in demand in the material market of that people were eloquence and fine speech. So what was popular at the time was eloquence and poetry. For example, now it's technology where governments are racing in that field. But at the time, people were racing in the fields of literature, eloquence, speech, poetry. A tribe's poet or orator was like its greatest national hero. It was he who was their greatest source of pride. Thus, among the peoples of the world, the eloquence and rhetoric of that intelligent people, who due to their intelligence ruled the world after the establishment of Islam, was at the highest and most advanced degree. It was the thing most highly prized among them that they felt great need of, and was their cause of pride. So in that time where eloquence was so popular, Allah has brought Quran, which actually challenged the whole humankind at the time. As we said, the biggest aspect of Quran being miraculous is its eloquence. At the time of Moses, sallallahu alayhi salam, it was magic, which was popular. That's why Allah has given him miracles in that aspect. For example, at the time of Jesus alayhi salam, what was popular? It was treatments of diseases. That's why his miracles were upon healing the wound, healing the blind, resurrecting the dead, etc. So at the time of Prophet ﷺ, the popular thing was eloquence, and that's why Quran was revealed. So then what did the Quran say on the second chapter? It challenged them with the decree of, and if you are in doubt about what we have revealed to our servant, then produce a surah resembling it, a verse. So وَإِن كُنتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ مِّمَّا نَزَّلْنَا عَلَى عَبْدِنَا فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِّثْلِهِ وَادْعُوا شُهَدَاءَكُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. So it challenged the whole humankind at the time and said, if you have any doubt of the book that we released to our Prophet, just produce a similar one. It also said, if you do not believe, you shall be damned and shall go to hell. It provoked them intensely. And on this other book of Badi'u Zaman, he actually comments and interprets this ayah in various aspects. He says, Quran is not just challenging in just a single aspect. Quran challenges the whole humanity in 9 different levels. What are they? The first level, we'll read some of these levels. Produce the like of the whole Quran together with its truths, sciences, predictions, and elevated composition, all from someone illiterate. So all these levels are being mentioned in different verses from the Quran. So the first step is this: produce a book like the Quran, which is miraculous in 40 different aspects, which is being written by an illiterate person who can't read or write. So that was the first step. The second level, if you can't do that, fabricate something, but its composition must be similarly eloquent. So it can only be miraculous in just one aspect, which is the eloquence. The third level, if you can't do that either, produce around 10 surahs. It's also being mentioned in a different verse from the Quran, bi'ashri suwar. So Quran is challenging the humankind. Not only that time, it is still continuing to challenge all of the humankind right now. What does it say? First, produce a Quran, which is miraculous in 40 different aspects, which they couldn't do it, they will not be able to do it. Then you can just fabricate something. It can just be eloquent, only miraculous in one aspect. It can be only 10 verses, not 114. It can be just a single long surah. What does it say then? If it's not possible for you to do it from an illiterate person who can't read or write, it can be a skillful writer or a scholar to produce that book. And in the 7th level, it says, if a smart being can't create a book like Quran, it can be the whole humankind gathering together, asking help from their gods, asking help from their jinns, the genies, the angels, whatever. You can still not produce a book similar to the Quran. And this challenge has been going on since 1500 years. And instead of writing books against Islam, instead of making videos which takes about thousands and thousands of hours of energy, you could have just written a single Quran which would just silence all the claims of the Muslims. It is still challenging, but so far we have nobody, and we'll have nobody else in the future. It provoked them intensely. It provoked the people of the time, which were actually relying on their eloquence. It smashed their pride in fearsome manner. It was contemptuous of their arrogant minds. It condemned them firstly to eternal extinction, and then to eternal extinction in hell, as well as to worldly extinction. It said, either dispute me, or you and your property shall perish. If it had been possible to dispute the Quran, is it at all possible that while there was an easy solution like disputing it with 1 or 2 lines and nullifying the claim, they should have chosen the most dangerous and most difficult, the way of war? At the time, non-believers actually chose the way of the war instead of trying to write a similar book to the Quran. Yes, is it at all possible that the clever people, that politically minded nation who at one time were to govern the world through politics, should have abandoned the shortest, easiest, and most light way, which is to produce a book similar to the Quran, and chosen the most dangerous, which was going to cast their lives and all their property into peril? Like, why would they choose a more dangerous path if they could just produce a book similar to it? It shows that they couldn't challenge the Quran. For if their literary figures had been able to dispute it with a few words, the Quran would have given up its claim, and they would have been saved from material and moral disaster. Whereas they chose a perilous, lengthy road. So it was not possible to answer by a pencil or writing. They answered by war, by sword. And millions of Arabic texts has been written until now, which were written by 2 reasons. The first, the ambition of the enemies to dispute the Quran, and the other is the followers actually like the eloquence and try to imitate the Quran. So we have millions of books written in these two intentions, but we have no such book yet which does resemble Quran in any of its miraculous aspects. But a question actually arises. How do we know that nobody has tried to dispute? Maybe some non-believers actually wrote a book similar to the Quran, which Muslims aren't showing to us. Well, the answer has a few answers. The first answer is if there is, just show it. The second is some people say you have actually written the history of Islam, so you guys decide what's to be narrated. But if you look at history, even the slightest detail which is against Islam has been narrated by non-believers. But something such important as bringing a book similar to the Quran, would that not be narrated? Of course it would have been. There are actually some narrations. There are some people like Musaylimah al-Kadhdhab which would try to challenge Quran and wrote a similar one, but it was nowhere near. That's why it wasn't accepted by any folk. And one aspect, I think I've forgotten to read that. Oh, here. So, this is a small aspect. Eloquence was so important at the time. What did they? They wrote their most famous 7 poems onto the wall of the Kaaba, the holy house. And they would praise and they would actually show off to other tribes by saying we have such important poets that you can read their poems on the wall of the Kaaba. But when the Quran came, their importance were decreased to nothingness, as it was much more eloquent then. I'll just tell a small story. I had a friend back in my university times who told me that he was a Muslim and then just left the religion. And I asked him, what made you leave the religion? And he said, I'm not convinced that Quran is the book of Allah. And I told him where you're coming from. He told me that he comes from an Arab land. And I told him, you can speak Arabic. Have you not heard of these 7 famous poems? And he told me that I have memorized actually all of these 7 poems. And I am really interested in the Arabic literature. And I told him, did you know that when Quran was revealed, the importance of these 7 poems actually decreased? He said, no, that's not possible. These poems are such important and valuable poems that nobody can actually challenge these. I told him, just make a research. And a few days later, he actually called me back and saying, I did my research, you were right. But I still have some questions related to Islam that I'm not convinced. If you can answer these questions, I'll convert back to Islam. And I told him, I might not have all the knowledge to answer each one of your questions, but you can just come to our house and we can discuss some of these questions you have. And he came. He had a small piece of paper where he wrote around 10 questions that he was really curious about knowing, that he wasn't convinced. And he would ask each one of the questions, and alhamdulillah, in these Rasail al-Nur, which are the interpretations of this time, interpretations of the Quran to this time, we were able to find his answers, and he would actually tick each one of the questions when they were answered. So alhamdulillah, in the end, he was convinced with all of them, and he converted back to Islam. So it is clear now that Quran is challenging the whole humanity to bring a book similar to Quran, which is miraculous in 40 different aspects, which is continuing to actually challenge the whole humankind. We have technology, we have AI, like which can write books, which can write a lot of things. We have many Arab-speaking non-believers. Why would they spend hours and years trying to disprove some of the pillars of belief? They can just bring a book similar to the Quran, they can gather, and that will be it. So it shows that they are not able to challenge Quran in any way. That's why they're using some other paths. And this is a very simple way to convince that Quran is miraculous. There are many different other aspects which we'll be discussing in our future lessons, but this isn't enough to convince for us, for beginners like me. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم